Hello, everyone. Today, I am going to talk about what race realism exactly is and why race realism does not equal differences. In order to understand race realism, we first have to look at what the definition of race is. Race is the classification of humans into groups. Race realism is therefore the belief that the human species is intrinsically divided into different races. A common mistake people make is saying that race realism is basically accepting that there are differences between the races. The most obvious flaw with this definition, however, is that it implies that the preconceived human races are intrinsically real, which is an evasion from the burden of proof. This definition is completely different from the real definition of race realism, which shifts the discussion away from whether or not humans are intrinsically divided into different races and instead focuses on whether or not there are any differences between the preconceived races. Secondly, this definition does not fit the term race realism. A more fitting term for this definition should be difference realism, which has nothing to do with the core idea of race realists, which is the idea that humans are intrinsically divided into different races. Furthermore, this definition can mislead people into believing that non-race realists do not believe that there are any differences between humans. Straw man arguments can be a result of this, like, you say that race does not exist, so you think that there are no differences in humans? Knowing the difference between race realism and difference realism is important before arguing about race realism. Someone who does not believe in the existence of race can still believe that there are differences between humans. Anti-race realists actually do believe that there are differences, but also that these differences make us individually different instead of racially, and that the differences are not only gradual and overlap with other differences, but also that the frequencies of these differences are gradual. Differences does not equal race, and it is important to know this in order to have an honest discussion about whether or not race exists and to make sure that people know what they are talking about. Race realism is believing that humans are intrinsically divided into races and not that they believe that there are differences into races. The latter one is just part of race realism on default. Race is a preconceived idea, while differences are a way to justify the belief in race. That is why, for example, race realists point towards genetic differences to support their race realism. Event off. Race realism existed before biomolecular techniques like DNA sequencing were invented and before people knew that DNA existed. Before this knowledge existed, it was easier to divide everyone into races, but now humanity knows that human diversity is more complex and that you cannot just randomly put people into boxes.